Why should I choose you? Welcome to Tea at Taxevity, where you get insights from insiders, our many clients and friends. I'm Pramod Sharma, and when I'm not doing interviews, I help people transfer financial risks with life and health insurance. Our guest today is Ian Chamandy. Ian, what do you do when you're not being interviewed?
I have a company called Blueprint Business Architecture, and we do strategic planning for companies. We lead them through a proprietary process that we developed to help them paint a picture of their future and then figure out what they have to do to live into that picture of the future that they've painted.
I had the opportunity to see you, I think it was 2011, when you were speaking to the Maytree Foundation, and you raised some very interesting points in your presentation, and I gather that's what led to this book, because you were talking about some elements of it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we developed our process. Actually, our process was developed about 10 years ago out of a conversation that my business partner Ken Aber and I had about strategic planning, realizing that we had a shared passion for it, but a shared frustration for how it's done traditionally. You know, you go away on the 2-day retreat, you grind through the same agenda year after year, tweaking the numbers, and then people go back to work on Monday, rah, new plan, and by Thursday they're back to the same old.
Been there, done that.
Yes. And you know, for many people in business, they've been there, done that over and over again. And they're frustrated by the process, but they don't really have an alternative, and that's why they keep doing it. And Ken and I said there's got to be a way to do this where people are so inspired by the plan that they're actually compelled to implement it. And so we decided to go into that business, but we had to understand how planning was broken so that we didn't recreate the flaw. And so what we did is we stripped strategic planning down to its simplest elements, and really it just answers two questions. Where are you going and how are you going to get there? But what that made us realize is that those should really be questions 2 and 3 in a 3-question process. And the first question, which is who are you, either nobody asks or the process that they have for answering it is so superficial that it renders the answer meaningless. And when you fluff the first question, you suffer from what we call the 5-degree rule, which is if you're off by 5 degrees coming out of the gate, you're going to be off by 45 degrees by the time you're a couple of miles down the road. And if any of your viewers are golfers, they understand the physics of that dynamic. So we created Blueprint just to answer the question, who are you? So that a company could be really grounded in the one thing that makes them uniquely remarkable. And what we found when we really nailed the answer to who are you is that figuring out where you were going and how you were going to get there became self-evident. For the leaders of the organization, it's like the veil lifts and the fog clears. So that's what blueprinting is all about.
The question, why should I choose you, is such a simple one, but it's also a very powerful one. You must feel it's a very important question, or the most important question. Why is that?
Yeah, so we believe it's the most important question in business. And I'll just pick up from where I left the last answer off. You know, we set up the company to answer the question, who are you? But the thing is, when you've got a bunch of smart people sitting around a room contemplating the question, who are you? It's a little esoteric and it leaves you chasing your tail. Separately from that, we started talking about the question, why should I choose you? Which on the surface seems to be a marketing and sales question.
Yes.
And for sure it is. But when you think about questions like, why should I invest in you? Why should I work for you or continue working for you? Why should I be on your board? Why should I be your strategic partner? Even why should I be your supplier? These are all why should I choose you questions, and there's thousands of them. And they have nothing to do with marketing and sales and everything to do with every other area of your business. So what we realized is that if you could come up with a clear, concise, and compelling answer to the question, why should I choose you? It would actually shape every area of your business. And that's why we consider it to be the single most important question in business. And where it ties into who are you, is what we found when we really, really nailed the answer to that question is two things. One is it could always be answered in 7 words or less. And the other is it actually also answered the question, who are you? So our conundrum of how to answer the question, who are you, was solved by having a really in-depth conversation around the question, why should I choose you? In that question, your 7 words or less, or what we call your core proposition, pops out. And now you have an answer to the question, who are you?
Oh, interesting how those two fit together.
Well, when you think about the question, why should I choose you? You really need to know who you are to answer that question.
Mm-hmm. And by you, do you mean you the company or you the person working for a company?
Well, it can be both. So our work is primarily with companies and organizations in the charitable and not-profit world. But we have blueprinted individuals, but the thing is the question is just as relevant for an individual as it is for a company. I mean, if you're going out on a job interview, you've got your resume and you've got that banal, or most people have that banal little statement at the top, I want to leverage my skills to help the company, and blah, 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 blah. And what does that say? It doesn't say anything. Whereas if you could put a nice, clear, concise, and compelling phrase up there that said, this is what I'm all about, you'd actually stick out like a sore thumb in a sea of resumes sitting on that person's table.
If I were to ask you, why should I choose you, what would you give as your answer?
Well, it depends if you're asking me or if you're asking Blueprint. So Blueprint, our 7 words or less, is from confusion to clarity. And excuse me, what that means is that a blueprint is usually the CEO's project or whoever the leader is. And that person will be in one of a number of different situations. Possibly having a number of different options for where he or she can take the company, all of which are good, all of which have good, sort of rationalizations for them. Plus, his or her executive team is probably lobbying for all of where they think the company should go. Each of the board members is. So the CEO is sitting there in a very lonely position saying, I've got all these viable options. How do I say, this is the option and this is where we're going? So that's what the confusion is. It's really about having all these good options and then being able to separate the wheat from the chaff and saying, this is who we are and this is where we're going. And that's the clarity.
I like from confusion to clarity because that's something that's easy to remember. It's even less than 7 words. But can't your competitors say the same thing or something similar?
Well, the short answer to that is anybody can say anything. The question is, do you have the goods to back it up? And in the blueprint process, I mean, we're not coming up with the tagline here or some sort of slogan. We're actually coming up, that 7 words becomes the strategic filter that guides everything that you do and say from that point on. And in order for you to be able to say that, you have to have the goods to back it up. And that's part of what we do in the blueprinting process. So every company has its own unique methodology. And the reason for that is because we believe that every company was started for the same reason. That somebody or some group of people said, we know how to do this better.
Okay.
But they can't necessarily articulate that. So that becomes the sort of founding philosophy and the basis for what makes them uniquely remarkable. And then they start to put the pieces in place that follow that philosophy. They don't see that as a methodology. So in the blueprint, it's all fine and dandy to say, well, we think this is what our 7 words or less is, our core proposition. But we then have to define the methodology that backs that up. That's the substance behind the saying. And if you don't have the substance, then you can't use that as your core proposition.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. We have a client that most of your viewers will know, even if they don't recognize the company by name. It's called Navigator. And it is the go-to company for high-profile people who are in crisis. So you remember when Michael Bryant was in that unfortunate situation where he killed the bike courier, when Brian Mulroney got his hand caught in the cookie jar, and for a brief period when Jian Ghomeshi got exposed, although they ended up firing Ghomeshi because he lied to them.
Right.
But you know, when you're really in trouble, this is the company that you call. And so they used to go in and say, we are a research-driven GR and PR company. And there was a client of ours that was going through a really, really serious crisis, so we introduced them. And they went in and they said, you know, we're here to help you. We're a research-driven GR and PR company. And the client just sat there and said, we have a mountain of research. We already have a GR supplier. We already have a PR supplier. Why do we need you? And they were sort of left going,
because?
Yeah, exactly. So what we, in their blueprint, what we discovered was, I mean, crisis was just a part of their business, but we really had to understand where all of their customers were coming from an emotional basis. And this is how we get to your core proposition or your 7 words or less. It's always understanding the emotional, where the customer is emotionally or where other stakeholders are emotionally, and then being able to speak into that emotional need. So what we discovered is, you know, a segment of their clients were in crisis, but other ones weren't. But they saw the situation as serious enough where they felt threatened, and where they felt so threatened that there was something of significance in their life that they were going to lose. And at that point in the conversation, the CEO of our client CEO said, it's almost like they're in a position where they feel like they can't afford to lose. And we went, that's brilliant. And so for Navigator, their core proposition became when you can't afford to lose. Now, what's substantive backup for that? Because Navigator does not deal in garden variety marketing and sales stuff. They're not going to take on a product and try and boost its share and that sort of thing. Quite frankly, that sort of stuff bores them. They're all type A personalities, adrenaline junkies and that sort of thing. And most of them come from the world of politics. And it's all very high stakes stuff in the world of politics where if you don't win, you lose.
Okay.
Whereas when Molson's is fighting Labatt's, if they increase market share by, by 5 basis points instead of 6, that's not a crisis. But in politics, if you don't win, you lose. So they were all sort of baptized in that high stakes pot boiler. And so what they do is they bring that discipline, that methodology, that mindset that it's only about winning to how they manage their clients.
Okay.
And without that background, it would be very hard to stand by a core proposition like when you can't afford to lose.
Companies have different stakeholders. Can the answer to why should I choose you be the same for each group?
Yeah, so that's how we know when your core proposition is truly your core proposition. So in the course of the conversation, when we're working with our clients, a core proposition will pop out at some point. And everyone will say, that might be it, or, oh, wow, we really think that's it. But then we have to bulletproof it. So what we do is we make a list of all their material stakeholders, and then we say, does this resonate with each stakeholder at a deep emotional level? Now, the thing about that is it's not going to resonate with each stakeholder in the same way.
Because that's what I was wondering.
Right. It's going to resonate with them differently. So when you go back to Navigator's core proposition, and imagine there's a famous picture of Michael Bryant sitting in the back of the police car, and his face is ashen and his eyes are staring ahead. And you can just imagine what's going on in his head, right? Because this guy was the Attorney General of Ontario. He was a celebrated lawyer. He lived a charmed life. And now he's handcuffed in the back of a police car. He never imagined in a million years that he would see himself in this situation. And you can just see all that written all over his face. He's petrified. And then you have a company sit down and say, we're here to help you when you can't afford to lose. And you can just imagine him almost breaking out into tears saying, oh my God, that's how I feel. And he said, look, we're on your side and we've got everything under control and we're going to help you out of this situation. So, it's turning desperation into hope for Michael Bryant. That's how it resonates with him. If you're an employee of Navigator, it's not going to resonate with you like that at all. It's like you are at the top, the very top of a pyramid of companies that do this kind of thing. But you're all recognized, everybody recognizes that Navigator is the primo company in doing this. And so it follows logically that the people who work there are among the best practitioners of this in their field. And what When You Can't Afford to Do does is it gives them a swagger. It gives them a well-deserved confidence. And again, if you're Michael Bryant in that desperate situation, you want that company to exude confidence because that's going to give you confidence. If they came across as nervous or hesitant or uncertain, then they wouldn't have the same credibility. So the way it resonates with employees of Navigator is just giving them this confidence, reinforcing for them how good they are, and allowing them to have a swagger that is actually important to their business.
Okay, thanks for explaining that, because that was one of the areas I was having a little bit of an issue, is that it seems that we do need different messages for different stakeholders, but I can see how having the right core proposition can work for different groups.
Yeah, and in the blueprint, so there's 3 parts of the blueprint. There's the core proposition, the 7 words or less. What we then do, because that's essentially the articulation of your DNA. So what we do is we say, well, every part of your business should be fully aligned with your DNA. So we look at every part of the business and say, is it aligned with the DNA? If it is, we don't touch it. If it's not, we say, how does this need to be shifted in order to be aligned? And that's how we get the whole substance of the business, excuse me, aligned, fully aligned. Then we say, okay, let's use the DNA to construct the story of the company, a very powerful and compelling story of the company. So those are the 3 parts of a blueprint: the core proposition, the business architecture, and the core story. And together they guide everything that the company does and says from that point on. And just to wrap it back to your original question about talking differently to different stakeholders, in the core story, one of the questions we ask, actually the last of the 6 questions that we ask in the core story, is, what do I get? If you're about when you can't afford to lose, what do I get? And so we look at each stakeholder group and we come up with 1 or 2 statements that explains that. And again, it explains how it relates to them or what they get at a deep emotional level. And the way a client uses that is that when they're then communicating to that stakeholder group, that shows them how to shape the story to that stakeholder group versus that one versus that one.
Okay. What's your main message for the people watching today?
I think the main message is that there are business practices that have become sort of axioms of business. They were developed post-war, post-Second World War, in academic institutions like Harvard and Stanford, and in companies like IBM and Procter & Gamble and General Electric and that sort of thing. Things like vision, mission, and values, and selling with features and benefits. And we believe that these have become either obsolete or are no longer enough on their own. So the question becomes, why do companies keep using them? And the answer is because there's no alternative, right? They don't know what to do in the alternative. And so that's why we've written this book. It's to present an alternative to what we think are the tired old ways. So when you go away on a traditional strategic planning process and you finish it and you feel like you just spent 2 days wasting your time, what can you do instead? They don't know. And so the reason that we wrote this book is because it's for two reasons. I mean, we've got, the narcissistic reason that we want to help it sell our business and that sort of thing. But really, we've developed a methodology that we're very passionate about, and that fundamentally changes. It's not just how it helps you grow your business, it's how it changes you and how you look at your business and how you feel about that business and how you perceive the value of that business. And it fundamentally changes people and really fires them up about their business again. And so we're on a mission to spread that, to say that there's a better way, and to have people give it a try and see if it works for them. Because the old ways aren't working anymore. And so that's what we want to do. We want to show them a better way.
Your book is worth getting just for the title alone because it's so provocative. And I'm hoping the content inside will be very helpful, because I've been trying to think of my own 7 words and it's not easy.
No. So, it takes 6 sessions of a half day each to do a full blueprint, but fully half of that is just getting to your 7 words or less. So it's not something we get all the time. What do you think that company's 7 words or less is? I don't have the foggiest idea, and it would take me hours of this process to figure it out. It is not easy. And I can't tell you how many of our clients, once the blueprint's done, say, oh my God, I felt like I just spent 20 hours on the couch with a psychotherapist. But it really is, not to blow our own horn, but when we blueprinted TIFF, the COO at TIFF said, we've been through many of these planning processes before, but you took us about 6 layers deeper. And you have to go that deep in order to pull out what the core proposition is, which becomes, the launch pad or the foundation for everything the company does and says from that point on.
What's the best way for people to reach you?
Probably at our website, which is the number 7words.biz.
Thanks very much for dropping by.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Tea at Taxevity. The Taxevity Insurance Advisory helps you understand insurance and bridges gaps in your coverage. There's no premium for peace of mind. How healthy is your insurance?